Hello, everyone. Welcome to the iSpring Solutions webinar series, where every week we talk about e-learning trends, share iSpring to cover clients' cases. I'm Paulina Ionina, the community manager at iSpring, and I will be the moderator for today's webinar. And we have a very cool and special topic. We are going to talk about PowerPoint design techniques to make beautiful and effective content. And whom should I ask to do this topic? I think you all know Richard Goring. Hi, Richard. How are you doing
Hi.
today?
Very good, thank you, Polina. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful, and I'm super excited for today's session. Richard would be the best person to go over different PowerPoint techniques because, as I love to say, Richard is a PowerPoint guru, and he's director at Bright Carbon. This is a firm that does beautiful PowerPoint content. And if you guys need something like that, you're more than welcome to get in touch with them.
So one of the things that's really interesting to me about design is that, well, really, good design is essential in all things. You know, something that's designed poorly won't be able to do its job correctly. And the same goes for presentations. You know, a presentation that looks like this is just not going to engage your audience. Design like this, if you can call it design, you know, text-heavy bullet point slides on a white background with random bits of clip art sprinkled on top, should really be relegated to the deep, dark depths of the past. That kind of thing isn't really going to work. And of course, you're here, so you know that already. You're already on board with the idea. I mean, nobody wants grim-looking content that's going to send your audience to sleep. The alternative is beautiful slides with eye-catching visuals that help illustrate the key messages and the content that you've got and impress your audience. But of course, going visual with your content throws up a few problems of its own. Specifically, you know, how do you make things look good? Moreover, what is good design? Now, there are a couple of different options here because it is kind of a tricky question to answer because visual trends come and go. What looks good is entirely subjective and can change from year to year. So do you go for sleek and corporate? Do you go for vibrant and colorful, or stripped down and minimalistic? From a design point of view, obviously. The simple answer is none of the above. You know, what I want to do is not to focus on the subjective, but instead the objective. I want to look at some of the tried and true evergreen design fundamentals, the most useful basic design theories as they pertain to effective presentation, e-learning, kind of graphic visual representation of information. And because I live to give, I'll even throw in a few handy hacks to help you create this kind of clean, well-designed content quickly and with the minimum of fuss. So without further ado, let's start making something beautiful. And the first thing that you really want to do when you're creating something beautiful is think about how things are laid out. So here is an example of a slide. What do you think of it? It's nice and clean. There's no kind of clutter on it. It's a nice font. There's not too much text. There's a nice picture, but it doesn't look right. I mean, all the individual components are there, but it still doesn't feel right. Why is that? Well, one of the main reasons for it is because it is just all over the place. Nothing is lined up. Nothing is connected in any way. It's rather randomly thrown on the screen. But if you take exactly the same content and just rearrange it, all of a sudden it starts to look much nicer and much better. And one of the reasons for that is because it's using a grid structure. And so grids are a core fundamental tenet of any kind of graphic design principle. If you do nothing else, make sure that all of your content conforms to a grid. Now, if you're not familiar with the term grid, you're probably familiar with the rule of thirds from photography, which is essentially a 3x3 grid. And what that does is it allows you to break your slide up into 3 columns and 3 rows. And that's exactly what this slide does. It's got 3 columns there. You can see the text is in each of them, and it's got 3 rows with the image focused on the top 2 and then the text in the bottom one. And so you can go through this slide here that we had before, and you can transform it using a 3x3 grid structure. Now, grids and guides are very easy to add into PowerPoint. So I'm just going to edit mode here so you can see it all. I'm just going to right click on a blank part of the slide and choose grid and guides from the pop-up menu here. And then I've got the opportunity to show guides. Once you do that, a number of different things will appear, but you can see I've already got a grid added on here. But if you want to, you can add more of these bars just by right clicking again, going to grid and guides and choosing to add a vertical guide or adding a horizontal guide. And so you can add your own grid structure up there, and there's lots of them to choose from. You can have a 6x6 grid, a 12x12, a 6-column grid. It doesn't have to have rows, for example. It can be a square grid. There are lots of different things that you can do and choose from, but that classic 3x3 grid works really well. And you can just build it all out very easily by adding those guides and then by just moving them around as you see fit. And then once you've done that, it's a question of lining all of your content up to it. So I'm going to take this image, for example, and I'm going to put this over the top 2/3 of the slide. So I can now resize it so that it fills the width of the slide. Go to the picture format tab on the ribbon and choose crop on the right-hand side so that I can now crop this up so that it's just going to focus here on the top portion, so those two top areas. Then I'm going to take the text. Let's maybe move this down so that it's going to fill each of those columns, and then just move each of these in place so that you've got them there nicely like that. So again, this is kind of nice and neat and even. Each of those pieces of text is in its own 1/3 of the slide, its own column. I'm then going to line all of these up, position nice and neatly within the middle of that row. You can go to the Home tab on the ribbon and you can change the alignment of the font. And because I've only got 2 words in each of these, I can use this center align function here in the paragraph spacing bit so that the text is in the middle. I can get rid of the unnecessary bullet points. And actually, you know what? I'm also going to just resize these text boxes so that this text fits nicely kind of there within this little patch. So it's got some space around it. So it's just over 2 lines. And one final thing, let's just add a nice line to separate these bits in here, just in those margins. So I've got one there and one there that fits really nicely. And so if you then turn the grid off, you see how very quickly and easily you've transformed that slide that didn't really look that good into something that looks and feels much better. And that's the power of a grid. It just works really very nicely to bring the content to life. And once you get the idea of a grid and you're using it constantly, you start to think, well, you don't have to conform to a 3x3 grid all the time. You don't always have to have things in straight lines. So here's another example of a slide that also uses a grid. It's a 3x3 grid, 1, 2, 3 columns there, and you can see that the left-hand 2 columns are taken up with the picture and the right-hand column is taken up with the chart. But the obvious thing here is that we've not got that straight line. Instead, it's at an angle, and you can see that that angle is also reflected in the title bar up here as well. And that's okay. The grid structure doesn't have to always be just kind of horizontal or vertical. You can do other things with it. You can go kind of off grid slightly, and as long as you're consistent, again, that will work really nicely. So a grid is something you should definitely do. I'll talk more about that as we go through the session today, and also other kind of techniques that you can use, but that's kind of fundamental. Another fundamental design technique is white space. So hopefully you've heard of the idea of white space, and this is really valuable because it adds a sense of luxury to something, in that if you've got the space to be able to do something and you're not kind of using it, that just feels nicer. It means that things aren't overcrowded, there's not too much going on there. But it also, perhaps counterintuitively, means that because there's not a lot on the slide, your focus is very much on the stuff that is there, and that's one of the reasons why white space works. So let's take a look at some examples of that. So here's the Apple website, for instance, promoting an iPad, and you can see there all of this space around it, and they've deliberately not used it so that your eye is drawn to the critical thing in the middle. Same idea, but this time with phones, and this time they've shifted it over to the left, and again, a huge amount of white space over on the right-hand side. This here, it's an advert for a Mini, again, is also using white space. Interestingly, of course, it's not white in this case, it's black. And so that's sometimes a misconception about the idea of white space. It doesn't just have to be white. Maybe you can think about something as negative space, for instance. So here we've got all of this space around the top and essentially around the bottom where you're not looking because it's just a solid color. There's nothing there to really draw your eye. And so you are focused in on all of this here, this kind of middle row of the grid. And so the idea of white space or negative space works really well. And again, you look at how you can use that to transform a slide. Here we've got a slide, which I'm sure you'll all agree is not very good. It's got a horrible font using Comic Sans, which doesn't really work in a professional environment. The text just feels quite big, especially for the amount that's on there. You've got a picture, which is very beautiful, but again, it's just thrown in. There's no kind of relationship to it and the text and anything else. There is some white space here, like all of the stuff at the bottom and at the top right here, but it doesn't do anything for the slide. It's not helping you to focus on a particular piece of content. But you can take all of these elements, and by changing the font and changing the sizing and changing the position, you can do something like this, which now feels much better. Now we've got the image, and the image is filling the entire screen. And so you think, well, where's the white space? And actually, in this instance, I'd say that the image is probably the white space, the negative space, because it's really there for background more than anything. You're not really drawn to it for certainly any appreciable length of time, 1 or 2 seconds perhaps. Really, you're going to be drawn to this piece on the left. And to accentuate that sense of negative space over on the right-hand side, we've also put the text into this colored kind of block color box, which again helps to frame it really nicely so that you're focused on this. And so that you're not lost, because there's quite a lot of content on here, we've cut this size of this text down, this kind of intro paragraph, so that you're now focusing on these key elements. And again, done some lines to separate them out so you can see exactly what's going on. So the focus is really drawn to this piece on the left-hand side through a sense of text hierarchy and the grid structure, and then white space as well. So as we go through today's session, I want to be thinking about those 2 principles and then how you can start applying them to PowerPoint and how you can use them to generate presentation e-learning type content in PowerPoint. I should also say, if you have any questions as we go through today's session, please do feel free to type in the chat. Please interrupt me at any point if there are questions that come up, and we can answer them and go through. And also, as Polina said at the start, this session is being recorded. So I'm going to go through a few different techniques reasonably quickly with the idea that should inspire you to do some of them at least. And then you can check the recording to see which ones you want to apply to your own content. Also, there is a PDF summary guide that you'll get from Polina tomorrow, which gives you step-by-step instructions for all the different things that I'm going to talk about, as well as links to more resources and more tutorials on all of these kinds of things, particularly as I'm going to talk about now with images, where I'm going to demonstrate where you can get a lot of really good images from. Okay, so with that, and assuming, Polina, that there aren't any questions.
There actually are. Do you
okay,
want to...
yeah, you want to? Yeah.
Yeah, let's do it super quickly. So first, what version of PowerPoint are you using?
I'm using Office 365, which is the latest version of PowerPoint. It's the subscription version. But everything that I'm showing you will definitely work in Office 365, Office 2019, Office 2016, and most of it should work in 2013, 2010, and 2007 as well.
Perfect. And can we use 3x3 in educational PowerPoint?
Yes.
Perfect. And
yeah,
how
so
do
that
you...
3x3 grid structure will work in anything. I mean, you'll see it on your phone, for example, if you open the camera app, most of them have that 3x3 grid line set up. It's a core principle of design. It's not limited to any particular type of presentation.
Perfect. And let's cover the last question for now and save others for later. How do you create the grid from a template, or how do you make a 3x3 grid so that they are equally spaced?
I will show you that very shortly. An excellent question that foreshadows the content that's coming up. Perfect.
Perfect.
Okay, let's get into images first of all, because this can make a really big impact on your content to make it look really good. So images, of course, look really nice. You can add them into the background of something. It gives it a richness and a depth that works well compared to just a solid white background. But you can also start to use images like we've got here, which can help to enhance your story a little bit. So in this instance, we're talking about a project roadmap. And so you can get an image of a road and then have content that actually sits on the relevant areas of the image to show that kind of building up over time. So something like that can work quite nicely. So see if you can get images that not only look good, but also help to accentuate elements of the story. Now, in terms of where you get images from, there are loads of really good places to do it. In terms of big, bold, beautiful photography like this, some really good websites include the likes of unsplash.com, pexels.com, pixabay.com, and also everypixel.com as well. And so again, watch the recording or look at the PDF summary. I'll show you in a second. This is one of the pages that you'll get in that PDF summary tomorrow, which just gives you a whole load of different image websites that you can get photos from. And the really nice thing about all of these is that they are all beautiful and they're all free and they're all for commercial use. So you can use them in a corporate environment for pretty much whatever you like. So these are really good websites. Also, if you do have Office 365, you can get images from within PowerPoint. So you can go to the Insert tab on the ribbon, and you can choose the Pictures bit here on the left-hand side, and you can choose Stock Images. And that will bring up a whole load of images that you can scan through, and you can see, again, really high-quality, beautiful imagery that you can include. You've also got a search bar, so say I wanted to include a rocket, for example, it will bring up everything that relates to that, and I can now choose the appropriate picture, insert it, and it will give me that image there that you can manipulate and use. So even PowerPoint in the subscription version, at least Office 365, is giving you access to a lot of this stuff too. So finding these kinds of images is very useful. And of course, you're all iSpring users, so you know that iSpring will give you, or if you're not, should be, but iSpring gives you again a catalog of various different characters and things that you can again use and incorporate things in. So trying to find these kinds of things shouldn't be too problematic at all. Once you've got them, you then need to think about how to use them. So taking a look at this slide here, like if I open the grid again, this is a much more complex grid of kind of 12 by 12, but all of these images conform to the grid. They've all got kind of similar spacing between them. They've got the same height. We've deliberately gone kind of off symmetry here. So it's a 4 wide, a 3 wide, and a 5 wide image, but that's okay. That's a stylistic decision. But there's still a problem with this image, which is that, or this slide, these two images here are focused in on the devices, whereas this one here is more about the environment, and this is about being served to every device. So this just feels a little bit odd. And so what you probably want to try to do is make sure that things are a bit consistent. And of course, you can manipulate images with PowerPoint by using the crop tool. So I can go to the picture format tab on the ribbon, crop over on the right-hand side, and I can then crop this image down to be able to focus on the picture. And to be honest, you all know that. But what is annoying about this, though, is that now this picture is the wrong size, and I have to then go back and resize it and all the rest of it, which is a pain. So instead of doing that, when you're using the crop tool to manipulate a picture, don't always think of it as something to cut down parts of the picture, but instead think of it as a window through which you can see the image underneath. Because if you notice when I crop, the rest of the image is still there. And what that means you can do is, instead of cropping the image down, you can actually use these white grab handles to increase the size of the image within that crop window. Now you can move the image within the crop window as well. And now what you have is an image that matches the rest of them. You've cropped it essentially by increasing the size of the image, but you've not changed the crop window, which means that all of that positioning against the grid is all preserved. So it's a much quicker way of doing things. Likewise, we've got an image here that again is just floating. Ideally, you want it to fill more of the slide, but you don't want it to go to the top to interfere with the title. You don't want it to go to the bottom to interfere with the logo. It would be really nice if it just matched the height of this kind of white box here, which again is kind of done to the grid structure. So you could, if you wanted to, like take this over here like that, and then you can resize it like this, but then it gets too large, and then you've got to scroll down and you think, oh, I've gone to the wrong page, and that's really annoying. And again, there can be real problems when you're trying to like oversize an image and then crop it down from outside of the slide. So again, another solution to that is to open up crop, and this time not crop the image down, but do something called an overcrop, where you can take that crop mark and make it bigger to fit an area that you want to. So I've now overcropped the image to be to the top and to the bottom of this white bar here, and to the left and to the right of the slide. And so what you've done now is you've created a crop window that's much bigger, but is where you want the picture to be. And then you can go to the picture format tab on the ribbon, crop over on the right-hand side, and you can choose fill down here in the crop menu. And what that does is it fills that crop window with the image so that it's now much easier to manage than anything more complex. So by using those techniques with crop, with images, it can just make things much easier to conform to a nice, neat grid structure and have things nice and clear. And then I mentioned at the start of this using images not only to look good, but also to tell part of your story. And this is an example of being able to do that. So here we've got an image, which is kind of all very well and good, but it doesn't work very well because it's just thrown on the slide. And here we're talking about 20% of businesses being connected to high-speed broadband. All right, but what is this slide trying to do? Well, at the moment, really nothing. But imagine you could use this image not only to look good, but also to accentuate parts of the story, and you can combine the two of them and do something like this. Then you think, oh, okay, so now we're highlighting 20% of the image to represent those 20% of businesses that are kind of on good connections, or 20% of businesses that have the lights on, essentially, which is what we've got here. And you can do that again just with PowerPoint, but also thinking about some of the effects that you can apply to images and some of the layout and layering functions. So now I'm going to take this image, I'm going to make it full screen so it kind of fills the entire slide. And then I'm going to copy the image. So I've got two of them there, and then just line them up on top of each other. And then I'm going to go to the picture format tab on the ribbon, and over on the left-hand side, use this drop down here called color. And what that does is it gives me all sorts of different things that I can do to the image to put a color wash over it, including this kind of nice light gray one here. So that kind of works to knock the image into the background, if you like, so that it's not as prominent. And if you then open up crop, well, what you can do is you can crop away some of that top gray image to reveal underneath the color one. And because you line them up on top of each other, actually they continue, so it looks like you've just highlighted one portion of the same image, even though you and I know that it's actually two. If I just send this backwards in the layers, then I can bring the text up here. This text is now too small. It's 20-point font, which is normally fine, but in this case, it's lost amongst the slide. So I'm going to double the size of that text to 40-point. Let's resize the text box so that it still fits nicely over 3 lines, which means that it's easier to read. And then just to link everything up together, just to make sure that people kind of realize this here, let's add a simple triangle to the slide like that, spin it around, position it nicely there, and you've got this nice kind of continuation here of this text kind of linking into that to give people an overall sense of the picture you're trying to get across. So you can see how quickly and easily you can start to bring all of this content to life to make it work. And that's using images, but your branding might not allow images, for example. So what about the use of iconography? Well, the same idea. You can use icons really effectively to get a nice, consistent, professional feel for your presentation. And again, icons are readily available. Places like the Noun Project, also material.io, and many others as well. Again, this will be in the PDF guide that you'll get tomorrow, but all of these different websites will give you access to great high quality icons. Illustrio, Endless Icons, Material Design are all completely free. The Noun Project, Orion, Flat Icon, and Icons 8 have extensive free options, but you can also upgrade to a premium subscription model where you get even more. And we're talking millions of icons from some of these, so you may not need to. But again, you've got lots of different options there. But as before, actually, within PowerPoint, you can also get some icons. So if you have Office 365, PowerPoint 2019, or PowerPoint 2016 now, you can go to the Insert tab on the ribbon, see this little duck and leaf motif here, and that gives you access to a whole library of icons that are, again, built into PowerPoint. So I've got all of these different ones here that you can choose from. You can do a search if you want to as well. So I'm going to search again for rocket like we did before. Comes up with things that are relevant there. Click, insert it, and you've got an icon. And the really nice thing about these icons is that they are not pictures. They're called an SVG, or a scalable vector graphic, which means that you can make them much bigger and you don't get any horrible pixelation going on, which works really nicely. You've also got the ability to recolor them as well. So I can go to the graphics format tab, and just like you would with any shape, you can recolor them kind of however you like. So again, it gives you much greater flexibility to be able to do what you like, which works well. Which means that you don't have to get subjected to horrible slides like this, which are just all sorts of wrong, and instead obviously cut down a little bit of the text, maybe use some imagery to get rid of that harsh white background, certainly get rid of the terrible clip art, which is just terrible and inconsistent, and come up with something like this instead, where you've got a nice, neat, clean design aesthetic. It's to a grid, you've got consistent margins all the way throughout, you've got a nice consistent color scheme, and a consistent family of icons there to represent the ideas. So using some of those simple techniques, you can very quickly enhance your slide content so that it looks and feels much better. So any questions so far, Paulina, that we can answer before we move on?
Let's cover this one. My company uses a very limited color palette and fonts. Are there tips to make these slides more dynamic?
If you've got a limited color palette, to be honest, that might be very useful. You can often use a color palette to great effect. If I go to this one here, for example, let's just get rid of everything. You know, if I've got a series of content, let's just assume it's a couple of boxes there like that. You know, I've got, let's just do 4 of them. That will be easier. Then having a consistent color will probably work well. So if it's quite a bold color like this, then you might want something on a white background instead. That might be a bit better. So let's just change the background here so that it is white. Automatic, there we go. So something like that can work well. Get rid of things like the outlines, which don't work quite so well, so that it's kind of a bolder color. Also, I talked about using a grid. We should absolutely put these on a grid structure as well, so that they work nicely like that. There we go. Well, you get the idea. I should be kind of doing it a little bit more clearly. So something there so that these things all line up, which would be really useful. And then you can start to think about, well, if I've got icons, let's insert oh, here we are. Got a whole lot of icons there like that. Let's just choose these. I'm going to copy them in. Oh, it's crashed. I think I've pressed the wrong button. I tried to paste something accidentally. There we go. Isn't it always wonderful? But using a contrasting icon, for example. So I was going to take the white icons from here and put them on that solid color block, and that can work really nicely if you were to paste them in. So there we are. Let's copy those, paste those in here. So you can start to see already, you know, we can get rid of those now. That looks quite nice with that kind of solid blue color and then the white icons there. Or you can take it another step further and you can start to say, well, what I want here is not just one color, but something which gives me a little bit of depth to it. Okay, fine. Well, let's choose maybe a gradient structure. So with PowerPoint, you get these automatic tints generated as well. So it's all the same color, but now maybe you can do something like that, which works nicely just to try to bring that content to life a little bit more. And again, it's the same idea, but it's the same color family and the same scheme, but it feels that much nicer to build your content up. So those are some of the techniques that you can use to try to use a limited color palette effectively to give you a bit of depth.
Perfect, perfect. Let's cover just 2 more questions and move on. So, are the fonts used native to Windows or Mac?
Yes. What you're looking for is a very small list of system fonts. Just a quick Google search. There we go. System fonts for Mac and PC. You've got a relatively small number. So probably what you want is Arial is a good one, Tahoma is a good one, Verdana is a good one. Georgia can be quite nice as well. So those kinds of fonts, like 4 or 5 of them, will mean that they work across all different operating systems, and means that you're not going to get any issue with fonts kind of coming up.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And the last question for now, is it okay to have different size fonts on different slides and different font sizes on headings?
Yes, absolutely. So as I talked about with this slide here, for example, we've got different font sizes to try to generate a sense of hierarchy. But what you should ideally do is recognize that the fonts should be deliberately different sizes. So here, for example, this font is 20-point font, and then this is 24. So there's a reasonable gap between it. If I was to make this 22-point font, it would be too similar, too close to this to make it work. Also, try not to have more than 2 or maybe pushing 3 font sizes on any one slide, ideally in any one presentation or piece of e-learning, piece of content, because then your font is jumping around all over the place. I think you can get away with a 4th size if you have, footer content references and things. Obviously that can be really tiny, 8, 9, 10-point font or something, because it's there not to be read particularly. But yeah, you can get away with different font sizes, but try to make sure that they are clearly different rather than pretty similar, and try not to use more than 2 or 3 for consistency. So set a style and say, right, my title is always going to be 24, but my body can always be 20 or 18 point, for example. My call out stuff is either going to be 24, same as the title, or it's going to be 40 because I'm going to have big, bold outs which warrant that size. And then stick with that hierarchy, stick with that framework throughout your content.
Thank you so much.
Good. Okay, so some good techniques there, but obviously you want to be quicker with some of these things. So I wanted to introduce some productivity tips to help you guys to create stuff that bit more quickly. One of the things that it's worth noting is that if you're not using it already, you should absolutely be using something called the Quick Access Toolbar. Now, as I said, my version of PowerPoint here is Office 365, but pretty much it should be the same as all of yours in terms of all of these tabs on the ribbon. But I've got something here, which is this row of icons down at the bottom. And this is called a quick access toolbar. And it allows me to put any of the functions I use on a frequent basis onto it. And so if you've not used it before, you should find the quick access toolbar on the top left-hand corner of your screen here. So it'll have like save, undo, redo, things like that. So I would recommend that you customize this by right-clicking on it and choosing Show Quick Access Toolbar below the ribbon, and then use this and add any functions you use frequently to it. So for example, if you're always using the new slide function, great, right click on it, choose add to quick access toolbar. If you're always using the format background function, right click and choose add to quick access toolbar. So you're not having to search through all the different tabs to find the functions that you want. Then you start to think about some of the ways that you can use PowerPoint more quickly. So keyboard shortcuts are a good way of doing that. If you wanted to create a square in PowerPoint, you can look through all these different shapes, but there's no square. But there's loads of rectangles. And so what you have to do in PowerPoint is draw a rectangle and then guess, but that's not going to work. So instead, when you're drawing a shape, you can press and hold the Shift key. And what that does is it creates a perfectly squared version of the shape. So a rectangle becomes a square, or an oval, for example, becomes a circle. And so holding the Shift key means that you can create those perfectly squared shapes, which means that things are nice and neat and structured. Likewise, when you're moving stuff, if you've got a nice layout, obviously you've got your grid structure, which can help, but just for quick things, if you want to move stuff around, it can be a bit annoying the way that it moves all over if you just wanted to move it right or left, for example. Well, you can press and hold the Shift key whilst you're moving content, which means that it locks the horizontal or the vertical position, which means that I can't move it left and right if I'm moving it up and down, for example. So that can be a really neat way to very quickly move stuff to keep it in line with original content. And another neat keyboard shortcut is called the copy drag. So instead of having to do copy paste Control C and then Control V, which pastes it just to the right and just below the original object, which is annoying, I can select an object, press and hold the Control key, and then drag that object, and you've created a copy of it, which works very well. So something like that can be helpful. And then you combine the Control key with the Shift key to do something called a copy drag. And so very quickly and easily, you can create a nice, neat structure like that where everything is lined up. So keyboard shortcuts, really valuable. And again, in the PDF summary that you'll get tomorrow, that will give you those keyboard shortcuts and a whole load more that I think are really valuable. And they're fine up until the point where you start to realize that actually they don't work quite as well as you'd want, because particularly for alignment, you need to do more. So let's imagine a scenario like this. You've got a nice slide to talk about the strategy for the year ahead. Good time to do it. You're going to talk about the journey that we've got together. That's fine. Get a road in the background from Unsplash or Pexels or something. You've got 3 key points that you want to get across. That works really nicely. It looks really good. It's going to be a great presentation. And then, partly because you value her opinion, but also because you want to show off, you share it with your boss, and she comes back and says, oh yeah, I like it. I've just made a couple of changes. Can you tidy it up? And what you get back is this, and you think, oh, good grief. How long is it going to take to fix that? Well, actually, the answer is seconds by using something called the alignment and distribution tools in PowerPoint. So if I were to select all of these 3 black circles here, I can go to the Home tab on the ribbon, and over on the right-hand side, Arrange, and down at the bottom, you've got Align, and that gives you 6 different options to align objects relative to each other. So if I were to choose Align Left, it will align all of the objects to the leftmost portion of the leftmost shape, so over here. If I were to choose Align Top, then it will align all of them to the topmost portion of the topmost shape, so there. And so that's nice because they're all now neatly lined up, which is great, but there's still a problem with the spacing. Well, again, you go back to the Home tab, Arrange and Align, and here you've got 2 options to evenly space, distribute horizontally or vertically. And I can now do distribute horizontally, and it evenly spaces things out. And that's great, but what about this new content that's down here? So I'm going to select the black circle because that's in the right place, then select the line and then select this text. And of course, I want to go Arrange, Align, and Align Center. And if I do that, what's going to happen is everything's going to move, and it's really frustrating. So with the alignment tools, which by the way, I've added to my quick access toolbar because I hate the fact that I have to go to a submenu of a submenu of a submenu to find them. With the alignment tools, they don't work quite as you would want or as you would hope. So brief shameless plug alert, if I may, at Bright Carbon, we've developed an add-in called Brightslide. This is available completely for free, so I feel okay to promote it a bit. But we're a design agency. Essentially, we create lots of presentations for people, and we have lots of frustrations, including this problem with the alignment tools. So we've developed an add-in, which is a new tab in the ribbon. So just like your iSpring will show up, and it gives you a whole lot of design productivity options, including new functions for the alignment tools. So what we've got here is the ability to do things with the alignment tools, like align to the selected objects, which is the default, or you can align things to the object you selected first, or to guide you to the slide. And because I hate submenus, we've also added in keyboard shortcuts here, so I can press and hold the Shift key, and it will now mean that all of my alignment tools in the Quick Access toolbar will automatically revert to aligning to the first selected object. So I can now press and hold the Shift key and then do Align Center. And now instead of everything moving, these move and align to that circle. I can do the same thing over here, press and hold the Shift key and it comes in, press and hold the Shift key and it comes in like that. You can select those, do top, select those and do top. And so you see very quickly you've tidied up the slide, but you've been able to do it much more quickly than you might do otherwise by using an add-in. And just very briefly to show you some of the other things that you can do, like here I've got a whole lot of icons, they're fine, but they're all different sizes. So again, that frustrates us. So this Brightslide tool, we've got something called match size, where it'll make them all the same size. We've got a distribute to grid function, which comes up with something like this, which gives you the opportunity to distribute them to a grid where you can choose the number of rows or columns. You can choose what the spacing is between them as well. Done, and it's there for you. Things like this here, I've got a picture. I had to do the overcrop technique before, which can be a bit annoying. If you just want this image to fill the screen, you can go and do match size and it will come up there for you as well. And then there was a question before about the grid and how you can add that in. Well, you can right click and you can choose grids and guides, and you can show a guide here and you can start to manipulate these and move them, and you'll see some little numbers appear there. Those numbers are from the ruler And this ruler is based on the size of your slide, in this case in inches, because I'm in the US, and the center point of it is 0 and 0. And so you can, if you want to, kind of work it out from there and try to figure out your own grid. But to be honest, it's an absolute pain to try to move all of these things manually. So one of the things that we've done in this Brightslide add-in is give you the ability to create your own guides, either at the slide master level, at a layout level, or to the normal editing view. And I can now choose that, and it will say, right, what kind of grid do you want? You can have the number of rows, you can have the number of columns, you can choose whatever you want there. You can choose whether or not you have a gutter inside of them. You can choose what margins you have, and then it instantly does it for you very quickly and very easily, as opposed to taking probably hours to do that manually. So this add-in is really designed to help save you a lot of time if you're doing design-focused tools or design-focused techniques. And so you can then combine all of those. So I've now got a nice grid structure, and here I've got this for kind of, white space and using imagery. So I can align this to the grid. Let's kind of have this kind of come down here as well to give me something just there, probably, I think is good. Let's resize this a touch so that it's there. And I've now got this image, which is also giving me a sense of white space. And I could then maybe draw a content placeholder which sits nicely kind of in this grid just there, for example, and that's where you could maybe make it white, and you can change the fill so that it's got a bit of a transparency to it, like that. Let's get rid of the grid now, and you can put in a chart or something like that that would then sit into that space really nicely. Let's just add in a chart, for instance, there. And you can see how these kinds of things will all just come together really well by using that idea of the grid and the white space and whatnot to have everything kind of fit really well into your content. So you get the idea, hopefully, how you can start to combine these different techniques to make things work really well. Polina, any questions so far?
Do you mind sharing the link to this Brightslide app?
Yes, absolutely. You can go to brightcarbon.com/brightslide, and you can download it from there. And that's available for PC and Mac. So if anyone's tried to do that before on a Mac, it didn't work last year, but as for the last month or so, we've had it available on Mac as well.
That was one of the other questions.
Yes, so it's on both. Okay, awesome. So that kind of thing is really neat, but that's all about essentially static content so far. And one of the brilliant, awesome things about iSpring as a conversion tool using PowerPoint is that you get to make use of all of PowerPoint's animation functions for your e-learning, which is just phenomenal compared to a lot of the other kind of tools out there. And so when it comes to animating content, you can also use animations not only for storytelling purposes and pacing the flow of information, which you absolutely should do, but you can also use animations to make things just look and feel that little bit nicer. So here we've got an example of a slide which is kind of telling a story. It's saying that we're wasting loads of money on corporate training programs every year because in just this one small classroom here, only she's getting any value from it. For everyone else, it's a waste of time. So a great visual story there. And then we want to make an impact at the end to say this new program that we want to do means that everyone will actively engage. And so we've got this big yellow arrow that comes in to say that we need to do this to make sure that everyone's actively engaged. Okay, so that's quite a big, bold statement for that thing to come in. It's quite a large thing, and we've got it kind of moving in across the entire slide. And so having a lot of movement, a lot of animation or motion on a large object can often be potentially distracting. So you need to think very carefully about how you're animating these things in. So if I just bring up these arrows here, I've got 3 different versions of the arrow with 3 different animations, and I want to look at how they all work and what they do. Let's just slow down the animations for all of these, and you can see a little bit more about what they're doing there and kind of how they're working. So the top animation here is something called a wipe. So what that does is it just means that the entire object is there static, and it just wipes in from the left. The problem with that is that you don't know it's an arrow till right at the very end. You have this kind of soft edge leading all the way through, so it's generally not a good animation for a large object. The other objects that we have here are using a fly-in animation, which means that the entire object starts off the edge of the slide and then it flies in from the left. And that's kind of fine, but this one here in the middle is just, it's coming in at a constant speed and it stops very abruptly, which again doesn't feel very natural or very useful. Whereas the one at the bottom is the same fly-in animation, but it comes in quickly and then slows down gradually to a halt. So it feels much more natural. So of these three, this one at the bottom just feels nicer, feels a little bit kind of neater and smoother and more seamless. And so to achieve that, we've used an animation called fly in that I mentioned. So I'm going to select this object, go to the animations tab, choose add animation, and choose this green entrance fly in here like that. Now the default is that it comes in from the bottom, which is annoying. So I'm going to choose the effect options button on the right hand side here to change the direction. And so you see here I can now choose from left and it flies in from the left. But all that does is it gives me that kind of abrupt halt, which isn't really what I want. So you can start to manipulate some of these animations quite nicely by going to the animation pane, right-clicking on the animation in question, and choosing Effect Options from the pop-up menu. And what that does is it gives you a few different things. It gives you the direction that we had before, but also these functions called Smooth Start and Smooth End, which allow you to, well, start the animation smoothly. In a motion case, it's accelerating up, or a smooth end where it's decelerating. And so I'm going to choose a smooth end all the way across here. So the entire thing is just starting fast and then slowing down. And now it comes in and it's kind of coming in nicely, and then it slows down and slows down and slows down. And so that kind of thing can just work really nicely to make something very smooth and seamless. So you've got that there, and in just one case, it's kind of good. But if you have lots of content, it's even more valuable. So something like this here, where we've got a chart that comes up, all of these bars are kind of growing in and they're coming in nice and smoothly and seamlessly. The other thing that they're doing there is they're all coming in kind of gradually. It's not just one big go, it's kind of coming in relatively quickly, but kind of staggered. And again, you can do that with PowerPoint. So I can go here to this chart. I've got all of these different pieces. I'm going to select all of them. I'm going to do add animation, do fly in. From the bottom is fine in this instance. Right click on it, choose timing, choose effect options, and then I can do the smooth end for all of them like that. So they're all coming in nice and smoothly. But the other problem that I have is that they're all coming in together. And so what you can do is go to the animation pane, find the animations, and you can actually select them and you can drag these things around. So instead of starting at the same time, they start on a little sequence here. So I can do a delay of 0.1 second, 0.2 seconds, 0.3 seconds, and then very quickly you realize, yeah, but I got loads of them and I don't have time to do that. And you're right. So if you do want to have staggered animations and there's a lot of content, again, this Brightslide add-in that we've developed, one of the things that we've got there is animation functions, including something called a waterfall delay. And what that does is it gives me this tool here where I can choose what the delay is going to be. So I can choose, half a second or 0.1 second or something like that, which works nicely. And then I can choose what kind of animations are included, if you want to include or exclude some, and choose OK. And that now puts a stagger on all of these instantly so that when you are animating it, they will all come in instead of in one go in a nice kind of seamless stagger like that. And then you start to get into, well, what else can I do with animations to make them that bit more seamless and neater? So here's an example of a slide where, again, we're building up this idea of a story. So this is talking about funding for a college. 2019, 2020, we were fine. That was kind of a baseline for 2020, but in 2021, we've got a funding gap, which is problematic. Now, with all of these things coming up here, it's fine. You can, of course, animate those as you should do with animations to be able to pace the flow of information and tell a story. So super quickly, I can select the line, I can select these. I'm going to select the line and just choose a wipe animation and do it from the left. I'm going to select these and I'm going to do a fly in animation from the bottom, like that. I'm going to select this text and I'm going to do a fade animation like that. And I'm going to do this to make it have a bit of impact and use a zoom animation like that. So I've got all of these pieces and they can come in and I can change the timing. So you can see very quickly, you can start to add all this stuff in here. But I don't know if you noticed, like if you watch these green ones, how they're that bit smoother. So I've obviously got the smooth end on the fly-in animation for these bars that I didn't do there. but there's something else about the way that these kind of come in. They just feel that little bit kind of neater and smoother. And let me just demonstrate it here. Like if I add that simple zoom animation to this, and we do it at the same time, just watch the difference between the one on the left and the one on the right. See, the one on the right is kind of just coming in and just stopping quite abruptly, whereas the one on the left has a little bit more energy to it. And so rather than just using the standard animations, so just the zoom, what we have on this one is actually a combination of 3 different animations to give it that kind of effect. We've got a zoom entrance animation, same as this, but also then 2 grow shrink animations. So these are available in the emphasis animations bit here, these yellow ones. And the grow shrink animations just make something larger or smaller. And we've altered the effects of them so that you've got something that's a bit bigger, you've got something that's a bit smaller, and it just means that you get this kind of nice effect where it just feels that bit more natural. It's kind of zooming in, and then it's kind of goes a little bit too far and snaps back in. So again, it feels more realistic. And again, you could, if you wanted to, spend all the time in the world thinking, well, I'm going to add this one and now this animation and change all the timings and whatnot, and that will be fine. But again, you don't have time for it. So again, built into this Brightslide add-on, we've got that kind of functionality. We've got a library of animations here, one of which is this bounce entrance, which now gives you all 3 of those animations with the right timing, with the right effects. And obviously you'll eventually come up with your own ideas and your own techniques and stuff. And so if you come up with a style, you know, the different types of animation sequences that you think work particularly well for storytelling or just for design purposes, you've also got the ability to save your own animations from any object that you have selected. So you can start to customize this in the same way that you can with a quick access toolbar to make it your own and bring the content to life, so that ultimately things just work much more seamlessly and much more naturally. And then in terms of being seamless and in terms of being natural, the big thing that you should really try to make use of is a wonderful transition in PowerPoint called Morph. So in the last 5 minutes, I just wanted to touch on that and how you can use Morph for all sorts of cool things. Now, check out the Bright Carbon website for the last webinar that Polina and I did together for iSpring for lots of different techniques on storytelling with Morph and how you can use it to your advantage for visual storytelling. But thinking just about design for a second, I want to show you how you can use Morph in interesting ways. Now, brief intro, if you've never used Morph before, Morph is this nice seamless transition to get from one slide to the next. So if I were to draw a box on this slide here, duplicate the slide on the left using Control and D, and then move this to the right-hand side on the second slide. You know, so far so basic. But you can then go to the Transitions tab on the ribbon and choose Morph over on the left-hand side. And what that does is it recognizes that this box is the same on both slides, and it will now seamlessly morph from one to the next. And you think, oh, that's really cool. But actually, it goes further than that. I can not only move it, but also do things like change the size of it and change the color of it. And then PowerPoint goes, okay, it's the same box, but in a different place and a different size and a different color. I can handle that. And so you start to think, oh, wow, well, if we can do all of that, what else can it do? And it can be used to great effect for design purposes. So here we've got a nice slide, which is kind of bringing in the idea of to be or not to be. And that is all just done using Morph. So you've got the text here, which is moving from the left to the right. You've got the image, which is moving ever so slightly in the background. And you've got this gray shape on the right-hand side that's moving to the left and turning orange. So it's exactly the same as that box, just all of those different bits and pieces happening. But you see how they're all happening together, and that just looks and feels really nice there. But one of the techniques that's interesting here is that on this slide, I've got to be, and on the next slide, I've got or not to be. And this or not text is kind of flying in from the right-hand side. Now, ordinarily, you can do that with an animation, but you can't have animations happening at the same time as Morph because it's a transition between slides. So what you need to do is recognize that this or not text needs to be not only on the second slide, but also on the first, so that Morph can recognize that it's the same thing, and it can seamlessly blend between the two. And so what you'll find is that with some Morph content, you need it to be off the slide originally so that it can then come in seamlessly on the second slide with Morph. Another thing to note here is that like I've got this text, but it's way off the edge of the slide. It's not just off the edge, which is what you would normally expect. And the reason for that is thinking about speed and timing. So this transition happens over the course of 2 seconds, which means that if you remember your high school physics, speed equals distance over time. I want this text to all move at the same speed, which means that I need it to move at the same distance. And so if you then consider that the text is ultimately going to end up roughly there, what I want now is for this text on the left to move that distance, and so this text on the right should move pretty much the same distance. And so I deliberately positioned it way off the edge of the slide so that when they do come into the slide, they're coming in at the same speed, and it's all now nice and consistent when they come through. And then you can take it even further. So something like this here, which has got lots of different bits and pieces coming in. There's lots of content here. So this text is not coming onto the screen, and now it's going off the screen as you build in these different sequences. And so it's just nice, neat, structured ways of being able to build content in very easily. So just looking at that text here, for example, and how that works. Here's the first slide with the text there off to the left, and you can see that that then moves in like that. On the next slide, we've got the text there in the middle, so it's coming in from the left off the edge here to there. And on the next slide, it's off the bottom. So we've got a 3-slide sequence with that text in for it to come in to the right place and then move down. We've also used these boxes here. So this box here is not on here. Well, actually, yes, it is. There it is. And it then just extends out because we're making it larger as you move through. And so that's how you get that effect of this content coming in nicely, and it's kind of got its own placeholder there that flies in, and it's just the box extending in size. We've used the layer functions here as well. So actually there's 2 boxes here, one for the main box and then this other masking layer so that the text moves underneath it, so it doesn't look like it flies in from the very edge of the screen. It's actually going to come in from within the margin there. And again, it's a nice way to be able to build that up. So again, you can take it to extremes if you want to. There's lots of different functions there, but hopefully some of those ideas about, still using the grid structure from before to be able to build that margin in, the idea of some nice clear white space, that fundamental principle still works nicely here. And then you can combine those different techniques to give you all sorts of lovely effects that just really enhance the look and feel and design of your content, as well as building in all sorts of wonderful things for your storytelling as well. Right, we are at the end of the session, so thank you so much indeed for joining. I really appreciate it. Brief shameless plug alert. These are all the different things that we do at Bright Carbon. So, so if you would like any help, please do feel free to get in touch. We create presentations, e-learning, information, infographics, and animations. But more usefully for you guys as content creators, if you are doing any of these things, check out the Bright Carbon website, brightcarbon.com, for loads of completely free resources and tutorials. Every Thursday we run webinar masterclasses similar to this, for instance. That Brightslide add-in that I mentioned, again, available completely for free. You can download that, brightcarbon.com/brightslide. And if you want to get in touch, please do feel free to do so. Follow us on the Twitter @brightcarbon or email info@brightcarbon.com. And then just try and use some of these ideas, some of these techniques, not necessarily all of them. Pick and choose some of the functions that you think will fit best with your content and your brand and apply it. And I hope that the really nice thing about all of the stuff from today is that it's somewhat universal. So whether you're creating presentations or posters or infographics or relearning, they will work. And of course, it's all standard PowerPoint, which means that when you're creating e-learning content in iSpring, it's all just going to work really easily and really seamlessly. So give it a go, try it out, and if there are any questions, please let me know now. But thank you so much indeed to Polina, to iSpring for putting this on, and thank you for watching.
Awesome. So first of them is there any option to get in touch directly with you?
Yes, so info@brightcarbon.com is the easiest to write down, and that will come through to me and others in the team, or richard.goring@brightcarbon.com is my direct email address.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And another question that we have, how do you keep the project file size from getting too large when using all of these images?
So yeah, with images, they're pretty much the only thing that will add file size. Images, music, video, any kind of external media, but all the animations and the morph and whatnot won't. They'll work really well. So if you find an image, something like this here, if you insert really large images, like a 50 meg TIFF file, that's going to increase the size of your project file by 50 meg. So what you can do is, first of all, try to reduce the file size. Don't download the biggest one. Choose something that is roughly 1 to 2,000 pixels in its kind of dimensions, so that it's going to fit roughly the kind of image size that you want, the slide size you want. But then also in the picture format tab on the ribbon, if you have a picture selected, you've got a function here called compress pictures. And this will allow you to reduce the resolution of images. Now, if you've got something that's kind of crazy high resolution, PowerPoint and e-learning content and stuff, iSpring is not going to make the best use of it. So you can, generally speaking, compress down to, I think, usually web, the 150 ppi, or if you're really keen, the print, the 220 ppi, but either of these is generally good. And that will help to significantly reduce the file size of your presentation if you have lots of high quality images in it.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And another question, if I have lots of text, what would be the best way to present it in a not boring way?
Generally speaking, excuse me, lots of text is never good for presenting. So try to come up with more visual representations of it if you can do. And Polina, you and I have done a webinar on exactly that topic, converting
Mhm.
text and bullet points into visual sequences. So check that out in the back catalog. If it's something that you want people to read because it's a technical thing and that's fine and they have to read it, don't try to present it. Don't put voiceover over it. Let people read it at their own pace. So that's one of the slides that you don't have voiceover. It's not automatically timed. They can click next to go on to the next page themselves. And then also try to break it up so that it's got a nice structure. So I talked before about the idea of kind of text hierarchies. So something like this here, where maybe there are going to be kind of key callouts, that might be very valuable. Or say we've got a whole lot of text here like this. So I'm just going to add a lot of random text in here just to try to demonstrate it like that. Let's kind of copy a load more of that here. So we've got a lot of text here like that. Okay, well, that on its own doesn't particularly look very inspiring, but maybe what you can do is to break it up into sections. So I'm going to have maybe something that does fit that rough rule of thirds. That can be quite nice. I'm going to also potentially get rid of the bullet points. Maybe you don't need those. Maybe you can split it up into individual text boxes. I'm going to cheat again and use this Brightslide tool because we do it frequently. And I can split the text here by paragraph. So it's now giving me 6 of those like that, which can work well. I could, I suppose, have it vertically. That might work reasonably well as well. So let's split all of those out like that. Actually, no, in this case, vertically doesn't really work. Let's change this so that I'm going to split it out instead by sentence. So you've got, oh no, sorry, keep going, split it out by paragraph. And I just need to rearrange it. So we're going to do it like that. Let's get rid of this one. Let's put all of those down here like that. Let's put those down there like that. And I'm now going to have like different blocks, so that can sometimes be a little bit easier to read. So something here is probably very useful like that there. And then maybe you might also want to put them into kind of color blocks, for example. So I've got kind of clear spacing in between them there like that. And it might be that you say, right, I'm going to put some, these in one color block like that, these here in another color block like that can try to bring things to life a bit more. Or you can separate it again and say, actually, these are going to be like call out bits. So let's make this bold. Let's give that kind of a new kind of font style, maybe a new color or something there. So you've got like different ways of trying to break it up so it's not just one big long thing of the same content. So hopefully some of those very quickly give you an idea of things that you can do.
Thank you so much. That's awesome. And another question that I wanted to address to you, and actually we had quite a few questions on that topic. Are you a fan of PowerPoint's design ideas?
Potentially, it depends what you're doing with it. So for anyone that's not aware, in Office 365, I'm just going to open up a blank presentation because this is where it works best. I can choose to create a presentation that doesn't look just really terrible like this, with really boring layouts and with a really generally pretty poor color scheme. And I can say, right, what do I want my presentation to be inspired by? I know something that none of us are doing at the moment: travel. I can then go to the design tab on the ribbon, design ideas on the right-hand side, and it brings up new things that you might represent the idea of travel. So I've got this, and it's like, oh, well, that's an interesting way to do it. And also, it's not just about a different picture in the background, but it's now giving me usually different color schemes. Let's try this one here. I've got different, no, okay, let's try, it's failing me a bit. Let's try something else like this one here. So it's got things that are relevant. There we are. It's changed the color scheme as well. It's changed the font. It's given me different layouts of it. So stuff like that can work well. And then I can also do something like cars are slow, trains are useful, planes aren't flying, whatever it happens to be there. Travel options, it will then start to generate, instead of just a list of bullet points, it'll say, well, why not have it like this, for example, where we can get some icons that are going to go into it. Or if you've got, new content here, which is kind of, where are we? Feb 10 is kind of meeting, Feb 12 is kind of planning, and Feb 14 is Valentine's Day. It'll say, well, again, we could have maybe icons there, or hey, this looks like a timeline, let's do a timeline there. So it's trying to give you some options to do something that's just a little bit different from the standard. So that's fine, it's trying. Sometimes it works really nicely, other times it works poorly. So I think as a source of inspiration, it can be good. You can say, well, I don't know what to do with this. Maybe it will come up with something that looks really nice and feels really good. But it might be, 10% of all of your slides where you think, oh yeah, that's a really good idea and I can use it. I don't think you should rely on it. I don't think it's good enough yet. I don't think the design is of good enough quality. I think that you may have problems trying to achieve this with your own corporate templates. The PowerPoint team is doing a lot of work to ensure that this does start to work with custom corporate templates instead of their own, but just be a little bit wary of it. But it's design ideas. And so I would use it as that. I would say, well, this is really nice. I'm going to now incorporate that into my presentation rather than, and maybe modify it as well. Like these here, I can select these icons and you can actually change them. So click on it and say, no, I want to change it for something else. And you can then go to all the icons from before. So it might give you some good layouts and then you can manipulate it further. So use it as ideas, but don't rely on it.
Awesome, thank you so much. And I think it sometimes can really save time if you have to put together something really quickly,
Yeah,
but you don't have time for that.
yeah,
And you can
absolutely.
make it look really nicely. Okay, let's cover another question and maybe wrap up this session. So, can Brightslide be used for commercial presentations?
Yes, yeah, it's just a tool for creating content. So it won't impact your presentation at all. It's purely there to automate some of the annoying manual processes, or to help you to do stuff. But yeah, we developed it for ourselves because we have lots of frustrations with PowerPoint. And it's just there as content creation tools, but it has no impact whatsoever on the final file that you create. So it will share well, it will upload to iSpring fine. There's nothing visible that says any of this was created with Brightslide. So you can use it however you like.
Awesome, perfect. Thank you so much. I think it's high time for us to wrap up this wonderful and amazing session full of great tips that actually now is your job, folks, to get to go and use it, because we know all of them now, but the most important and hard thing to do is actually start implementing what you've learned. And I wish everybody luck with that. And of course, thanks to you, Richard, for coming and for sharing your knowledge with our today's attendees. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Polina. Thank you, everyone.
I hope everyone has a super lovely day, and I will see you at the next webinar. Bye, everybody, and bye, Richard.
Thank you. Bye-bye.